Anytime. Ooh.
We are live. This is Literary Roadhouse. One short story once a week. I'm Anais.
I'm Gerald.
And I'm Maya.
And this week we're discussing The Drowned Giant by J.G. Ballard. If you haven't read the story yet, pause the podcast, follow the link in the show notes to read the story, and then come back. In The Drowned Giant, a massive giant the size of a sperm whale, probably, washes up on the beach 5 miles outside an unnamed city. The city descends upon the spectacle en masse and quickly begins to climb on top of and explore the giant. We follow the spectacle through the eyes of an unnamed narrator, a researcher who visits the beach giant over the course of several weeks and notes the putrefaction of the body over time, and how the beachgoers carve profanities into his flesh, bruise his skin, and amputate his limbs until the giant is unrecognizable as a human. After a few months, the city dwellers forget about the giant, and even eyewitnesses begin to believe that the beach thing was just another large marine animal, like a whale shark. His bones and hands and feet are a macabre display throughout the city as decorative arches and backdrops to shops, or souvenirs hung over fireplaces, or as circus attractions.
Excellent summary, Anais. Now, one thing I will note right up front, there are a lot of parallels with another story that we previously read, and we will be discussing those later. So how did you guys feel about the top level of this story?
I liked it. Liked it. Yeah, I liked it a lot, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Surprised me.
I'm surprised too.
Yeah. Why are you surprised, Anais?
I'm surprised because I like the story, but there's something sort of clinical and distant about it that I feel like, normally Gerald wants like more things to happen. Like,
lack of plot.
There's no plot. Well, there's kind of a plot. Ish. We'll get into that.
It's more of a slice of life.
No, I'd say, okay, we'll debate about that in a bit. But this is definitely not a slice of life because there's not.
We're going to debate about why Gerald doesn't like the story and why Gerald shouldn't like the story. I love this.
Also, Gerald, you can also chime in and declare the winner. Or give your honest opinion.
Maybe. I'll just sit here quiet. Let you carry on.
So, Annie, how did you feel about the story?
I liked it, and it grew on me the more I thought about it. Like, I read it, and without having to read it again, I just kept thinking about it again. I was like, huh. So I like that. It like slowly just basked in my mind.
Yeah. I like how you said it slowly basked in your mind because I feel the same way. At first, I didn't like the story. I was like, oh, why am I reading this? It was very clinical, very distant. There's no real characters to emotionally attach to. And as far as plot, we can debate about plot. But, I mean, there's there, but not a whole lot of there. But it kept me interested. It kept me focused, and every time I would set it down, I would pick it back up. It's kind of been stewing in my mind ever since. And so in that respect, I liked it. It wasn't like my favorite story in the whole world, but I thought it was interesting. And the echoes, originally when I started reading, I was like, didn't I read this before? And I was like, no, this is different. And that was interesting too.
Yeah, I think the funny thing about this story is that I've only read it once, and yet I think I know it well enough.
Yeah.
And you both said it was sort of clinical and distant, and I think that's deliberate. I think it's and that's the whole point. And so. Yeah, I'm still intrigued as to why I shouldn't like it. Yeah, it has a plot. It has a start. It has a middle. It has an end.
Who changes?
Oh, here we go again. Who changes?
Hey, I'm just throwing your
giant changes.
I'm throwing your previous criticisms just back at you about other stories because we've approached other stories where you're like nothing changes, And so like I find it fascinating that both me and Annie's went into this thinking, oh, Gerald's not going to like this, and then you like it. It's just so cool.
Well, the main character changes. The giant changes.
Is the giant the main character, Annie's?
I don't think so. I think it's really about the people and the way that people react. And I think it's not so much that they sort of change in this particular aspect, and they go from really interested into disinterested, and it's just another part of life. But also it's a commentary on how that tends to happen, right? But I think it's really about like the spectacle and how people react to spectacles. Because the two things that are changing is the giant's body. And one thing that was interesting is the way that the narrator sort of projects personality onto the giant that changes as the body changes. That's kind of interesting. Yeah. But mostly, I think it's about the whole city's reaction, like the mob.
Yeah. I think the thing that I found, like you, I don't think the giant is the main character. I think the narrator, the observer, is the main character. But what I found most fascinating about the story was the end of the story, when people have seen something that is so different from their expectations, and once it is no longer visible, they so quickly cease to remember it, and it makes me wonder, like, are there aliens and we've seen them and we just like decided that they're not aliens? Are there unicorns and we've just decided they're horses? Remember the last unicorn? Humans see the unicorn and they think it's a horse. Like, that's what this kind of reminded me of, that human tendency to categorize things. And if something doesn't fit a category, we either make it fit or we pretend it never happened. And I thought that was very well done in this story. Like, the whole process of starting from being super excited by something to standing on it to bringing it down to a human level because it's scary, carving into the skin and treating it like crap, to taking it apart, to forgetting it ever happened. I mean, that whole stream, I think, is the point of the story. And that's the reason why I liked it, despite the fact that, I mean, it's a slight of magical realism and, not a lot happened, in my opinion. I think that was enough for me.
Yeah, I think, just for the record, I didn't really think the giant was the main character. That was a joke. But
don't walk it back now, Gerald.
Just
he was being
saying, I was being cheeky, tongue in cheek. But I thought,
you a hard time.
Yes, that's fine. Yes, I've missed you, and I missed you, Maya. Anyway,
was that the same tone that Southerners use when they say, "Oh, bless your heart"?
Yeah. Something like that. Yeah. So yeah, I thought it was very interesting that they were all the people that people on the boats that were moored offshore and the people on the beach stood off it, didn't know what to make of it until the first people sort of jumped on it and started climbing on it, and I love the fact he didn't explain what this giant was doing on the beach. Where's it come from? It doesn't matter. It's not important. So I loved that. I really like that. And so it changed from being a giant everybody was a bit in awe of, to this thing on the beach. It became a thing that they could jump on, and they could deface and draw a swastika on, for God's sake, and start hacking bits off it.
Yeah,
strange.
Yeah, but their reaction,
so human.
But is it? So that's what I was going to say. But their reaction is so. It's very critical of what it is to be human. We're all here kind of agreeing, that is what would happen. But the other story that we were talking about, which is the handsomest drowned man in the world, which we read on this podcast, when a larger-than-life handsome man washes up on shore, they make a funeral. The women fall in love with him. They give him a name. It's a corpse. And it, like, reinvigorates the village. It goes from a village that has no flowers and no joy to, like, flowers. And, like, it's a completely different reception. So it's, like, a completely different point of view of the way that something like this would be received by people. And I wonder, I have
a question. Do you know which order these stories were written?
So this is 1964, and I can look up real quick, The Handsomest Drowned Man.
Because I'm wondering if one of these stories is a reaction to the others about what would happen in the same situation if it happened in Latin America versus the Western world.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
Because this reaction is very Western. I could see this happening in America or London, whereas the other is more fantastical. So, I mean, I'm seeing that happening in an area where people are more prone to being religious, maybe have a more fantastical life internally than us clinical Westerners do. And so I'm wondering if one of these stories is a reaction or a response to the other.
So they're kind of contemporary. So The Drowned Giant originally published in the UK in 1964, but it didn't really sort of take off until I think it was like republished a few years later. And The Handsomest Drowned Man in the World was published in 1968. So they're kind of around the same time.
Wow. Yeah, that's really fascinating because there are so many similarities and both of them really feel real. But I remember when we read The Handsomest Drowned Man, being fascinated by how reverential the people were to the man, and because I didn't think that's what would happen here if like some beautiful giant washed up on shore, pretty much people would deface it until the cops showed up, and then the university would come down, take it apart in pieces and bring it back to their lab. I don't see Americans giving it a name and worshiping it and giving it a funeral.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's necessarily a cultural thing or if it's particular to these authors' points of views, right? So, because you could have nihilistic Latin American authors who would write something similar to the J.G. Ballard one and who wouldn't have the funeral. So, you can argue,
and you can have hopeful American authors writing. Right. What they wish people would do instead of what they.
So I think J.G. Ballard's British, I think.
Yeah.
Pretty sure. But but J.G. Ballard always explores this kind of stuff. This is like his thing. Things he loves. Gross physical deformities. I read Crash, the novel. That's like the one that he's known for. It makes this look really tame, like in terms of gross stuff. Like this is like a lullaby because that thing is, all right. That is like wretch levels. And he's always kind of exploring like the sort of darker side. There's a bit of a cynicism as to what to humanity is that maybe Marquez doesn't have to that extent. Not that he doesn't have shades of darkness and conflict and bad people and villainous people.
Much more in the magical realism. This is how we wish. This is how we hope humanity will be.
Villages are good.
Yeah, exactly. I love looking at these two stories side by side and really seeing the differences in them, where Marquez's story very much has a magical, fantastical element to it. This story has horror elements to it. Mm-hmm. There was a point about the last third of the story where I definitely felt like some old horror feelings in my stomach where I was like, ugh, and I thought that was really well done because it was very subtle. Mm-hmm. And it made me wonder how I would classify this story. Would I classify this as literary horror? Would I classify this as realism? I'm not sure, but the horror elements were definitely present, very gross, very grounded in reality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that was very well done by Ballard because it made what used to be a living, breathing human in quotation marks into an object. So an object comprising of bits that get hacked off and defaced and burnt and so yeah, it's sort of reinforcing that objectivization of the of this body that's washed up.
And earlier Gerald was talking about how we were all agreeing that it's about the spectacle, but to what end? So what is the spectacle doing, right? Like what is, because if you're looking at it as this is what happens when people come together en masse and gawk at something, but what is it that's happening specifically? And Maya kind of already said it, but like that clear in these terms. Like you were saying that they start hacking it off until it's no longer recognizable as human. So very literally, they are dehumanizing it. And I think that's something that you can apply to the way that spectacle dehumanizes the subject. Like that I thought was really cool. But that's the stuff that I said, like when I read it, I didn't get it. And then it's just like in my head.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the other things that just came to mind as you were saying that, because not only is the spectacle about them trying to digest it, dehumanize it, and process it, but the spectacle makes a spectacle of the people as well. The narrator spends a large part of the story watching the people's reaction to the drowned man. And when he goes down there, he's looking at what the people have done to him with a fairly critical eye, not critical as a negative, but critical as an observant, scientific eye. And the way the people digest it dehumanizes them as well. They no longer act like caring, interesting human beings that have their own thoughts and their own emotions. Now they are a mass of beings taking apart this thing. So I think that there, on some level, is a commentary about how not only how we respond to spectacle, but how spectacle changes us.
And also the behavior of a mass of people as compared to its individuals. So the behavior of a group, of a mass of people, is very different to the behavior that each of those individuals would exhibit were they individuals.
Yeah, I mean, this is a literary Stanford experiment in some ways.
And it's sort of, if you zoom out, that's what Gerald just said is confirmed, because we're in the point of view of the narrator, who has all of these sort of romantic thoughts. The Grecian giant, he's the hero from the Odyssey, he's an Argonaut, he's got all of these romantic ideas. But if you weren't in the narrator's head, if you were just on the beach, he's just another gawker, right? Like, we don't know. I mean, we know what's in the head of a demented teen in the nostril barking like a dog. But the people who are just sort of sitting around on the beach, they might also be having these romantic thoughts, but no one feels brave enough to do anything. At no point does he say, stop this, right? And that's the mob think that Gerald was just talking about.
Yep, exactly.
Mob think. Good word.
Mob think, man.
Yeah.
As humans.
Yeah. It's really good.
Yeah. And the more we talk about it, the better I think it is. Like, this story, like I said, at first, I felt kind of bland about it. But the more I read it, the more it drew me in, the more interested I got. It didn't leave me after I was done reading it. I just kept mulling it around in my head. Talking to you guys about it, like, I'm rating it higher than I came into the show, most definitely. The more we talk about it, the more depth I see in the story. The language isn't anything special. The language is very clinical, very simple, not overly flowery, but not like minimalist to Hemingway level. It's just like plain language to me. Yeah, the story definitely has something.
Yeah. The prose actually reminded me of another short story that we read recently, but I don't think it made it to the show. When we Kafka's in the Penal Colony had that same,
the one where we lost my audio. You're right.
But it had that same sort of clinical description of like morbid dismemberment, physical torture, and Kafka was a big influence on J.G. Ballard, and it shines through in the prose.
Yeah, it definitely does. It's interesting that you were able to draw that parallel, because you're right. The prose very much has that same clinical distance and just plain written, average sentence length, nothing flowery, nothing too minimalist. It's not caught up in its own style. It's not a type of prose where you stand back and look at it.
Yeah. But then given the subject matter, that's what makes it remarkable.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you were to have anything that stood out, whether it's too flowery or too minimalist, it would take away from the quietness of the observation that's happening in the story. One of the things that kept coming to my mind when I think about the story is the word quiet. It's a very quiet story. It's really easy to be interrupted when you read this story, but it keeps bringing you back. It's not one of these stories where you set it down, you don't come back. But it's not a story that pulls you in and like focuses all your attention and is loud in your head. It's just a very simple, quiet story.
Yeah, there's one point I highlighted, which is quite cute. And he's talking, it's fairly early on, and it says, from here they climbed up onto the face, hand over hand along the lips and nose, and furrowed down the abdomen to meet others who had straddled the ankles and were patrolling the twin columns of the thighs. I think
that was as flowery as he got. I actually made a note of that sentence. It was beautifully written. That right there, I think, is really the only super flowery sentence in there, and it was beautiful. And I think that's why it stood out, because so much of it was so simple. But it didn't like make you stop or anything, which is like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah. And it would get flowery too when he would talk about like the identity parts of it, where he goes from like he's like, oh, the heroic aspects. The pearlescent skin, all that kind of stuff.
That's interesting that you point that out, because you're right. There were some flowery elements, but the story was so quiet. It's like I didn't even notice them.
It's because there's no editorializing. That's what we mean by quiet, maybe. Because at no point the narrator like these monsters trampling all over the giant. He's just like, they're trampling, but he doesn't even say trampling. Trampling is too much of a judgment. He just says walking on them. Now there's bruises, and there's no judgment as he's saying these things, even as he's admiring the giant.
Yeah. There definitely is a tone of admiration until his foot falls through the skin, and then it just gets gross.
Yeah,
that was kind of amazing. I was waiting for it. I was like, all these people trampling, this bean is bloating up. His skin's getting thinner. This isn't going to go well.
and again, at no point he's like, that was disgusting. Oh my God, I want to puke. No, he's just like, and then my foot went through.
And there was a smell, and I turned towards the sea to escape it. Like, so simple.
And I walked away. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Very good.
So was there anything else about this story that you guys wanted to touch on?
Not really. I kind of combed through all my notes already because it is
me too.
simple.
Yeah.
It is really simple. It makes me wonder, do you think Rami would have liked it? I kind of want us all to guess and then find out if he really liked it or didn't like it.
Yeah.
Because I'm kind of curious if we're going to be right.
I think
he liked it. I think it's simple and it has a moral. So I think he would like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be a nice story. It's sometimes referred to things as, it was a nice story. But this wouldn't be a nice story.
I think maybe you wouldn't like it because of the grossness at the end, though.
Nah.
You might think that was unnecessary.
I learned so many synonyms for male private parts.
Yeah.
That was exciting.
I had to look that one up.
Would that be necessary? Was that really necessary?
Pizzle, yes. It's quite funny.
I love penendum. I had to look that one up. I was like, oh, that's a great word. Is that what it's really called? It took me a second. I loved it. Because, of course, that's what we would do. We would cut it off and like display it someplace because it would just be like this giant obelisk.
When I was doing research,
you didn't use that one.
When I was doing research, I came upon a bit of fan fiction, and it was the circus act with the pizzle.
No, really?
Yeah, that was the fan fiction. The massive pizzle.
Oh,
we should read that one day.
No, it was
probably
just
not on air.
A drawing, like an illustration. It was fun.
Oh,
okay. That is hilarious.
I like it.
Oh, humans! If there's two things we're not fascinated by. Mass spectacles and pizzles.
And this story's got them both.
I'm glad we've kept the language very PG.
Hey, it was a close call there for a minute. It was a close call. Yeah, I think my judgment is I think he would like it. I think he would find some elements gross or unnecessary, but I think he would like the moral of the story, and he would like the simple language of the story, although he might complain that not enough happened. That's my ramification.
Also, when he's going through all of the body parts that are on display, I saw thigh bones flanking a store, like a shop door, and all these things. He just casually throws one in there that's like, one of these is not like the other though, which is a big slab of tattooed flesh hanging like a oriental rug behind a desk. That is extra creepy though. There's a
museum of tattooed flesh, though. If you're a tattooed person, especially if you have really amazing artwork, you can donate your skin, and they will tan it and preserve it. Because some amazing artists have been tattooists, and so they have full body pieces from some of the Yakuza. They have various different schools of tattooing, and if I ever get my back piece, I could donate my skin.
Isn't a picture worth 1,000 pieces of flesh?
I don't know. I think there's something fascinating about the idea of a tanned hide with pictures in it, and I'm especially curious, because most of the people in the museum are probably Caucasian. I'm especially curious, will the tattoo even be visible on dark skin after it's been tanned and tanned? or will it just disappear? But some of the tattoos are so magnificent that, you know, and having it on skin is an intrinsic part of the art. I don't think a photo actually does justice.
Yeah. But then you also have to shape it because the grand skill of tattooing.
Stretch it just like a regular hide. They like stretch it and
because it's the contours. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's humor in this story. I was just looking at
and segue away from the tattooed hides of humans.
Well, we're talking about the story. When it's in that same piece, it says, a few days later, I saw the left humerus lying in the entrance to one of the shipyards. In the same week, the mummified right hand was exhibited on a carnival float during the annual pageant of the gills. I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah, but what I found interesting was when they still have these things on display, people have physically seen the creature, person, human. They remember it, and yet they say that it's from a whale.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's literally, the pizzle is listed as a whale at the exhibit. I think that is just so telling.
Yeah. Yeah. The weird thing is that since we're not doing the game because we have a guest next week, I'm spoiling a little bit. But when I was doing the game was going to be, I was going to give you guys things that washed up on shore, true or false. Did it make it up or did it actually wash up on shore? And some of the stuff was washed up.
I know the game doesn't count, but can we do the game anyway? Because I totally want to play this game, and we're only at 28 minutes, and we can't have like a half an hour show. Gerald, you game?
Yeah, I'm game.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Bring it up, Annie's. Bring it up. I totally want to do this.
Yeah, I mean, there's some that didn't even make it to the quiz that I just remember.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, I totally.
So, true or false?
Who are we going to start with?
Let's go with Gerald.
Go on.
Okay, a motorcycle.
Washed up. This is washed up on a beach.
Mm-hmm.
True.
That one's true. It's after the tsunami, the big Japanese tsunami, 2011. Thousands of cans of coffee.
True.
Also true.
Probably from a barge, huh?
Yeah. Hundreds of wedding dresses.
Yeah, that would have been true.
False, but if somebody said it's true, I'd be like, sure.
Yeah.
See, I think false because wouldn't they just sink?
I don't know. They're like, maybe they get picked up by something. I don't know. Fossilized whale vomit.
True.
That one's true, and that was obviously.
Do they use it as part of perfume or something?
Yes.
I feel like that's something that gets used,
and it's worth hundreds of thousands.
Why do I know this? Why do I know this?
And it smells bad.
Weird. You women are just weird.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very weird that I knew that. That's kind of fascinating.
An entire model train.
False.
False.
Yeah.
Dinosaur femur.
True.
True. A robot hand.
True.
True. Giant balls of ice, hundreds of them.
True.
It's apparently a natural phenomenon that rarely happens, but when it does.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah, that was the quiz.
That was awesome. Yeah. That was awesome. Yeah, isn't like the whale vomit name like Ambrose or Amber?
Yeah, Ambrose. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
That's just fascinating.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, they use it to make perfume. It makes a beautiful scent.
Mm.
On the and this is totally off topic, but on the beach up at the end of my road, we regularly, well, not we, I've never found any, but people regularly find shark's teeth. And some guy who calls himself Sharky, strangely enough, has a collection of over 35,000 shark's teeth.
Wow.
I just want one.
Yeah.
Just one little shark tooth.
Okay. I'll find one.
I'm a shark that shed it naturally and didn't die for it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'll look for a special one. Yeah.
So are we ready to rate this thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, because now we're like just totally going off topic.
I know we are. Sorry.
I am rating this higher than I thought I was going to. I came into this story kind of confused about how to rate it. I felt like my enthusiasm for the story warranted like a 4.5 just because I didn't really feel like any strong emotions. But I realized this is a really intellectual story. and it's made to be thought about rather than felt. And I feel like looking at it like that, I understand the story a lot better, and I really respect this author. I'm giving it a 5.5. I feel like it was an amazing example of this type of writing, and it's going to stay with me.
It's the pizzle, isn't it? That's
no, it actually is not the pizzle.
Oh, okay.
I am anti-pizzle. I've been no pizzle for a few years now, and I'm gonna stay pizzleless.
Okay.
Well, I mean, yeah, like except for the 3-day segue, but anyway, pretend like that didn't happen.
Let's move on. I don't know. I'm so tempted to give it 5.5. 5.5. It was.
There is something about it, isn't there?
There is something about it. There is something about it. I don't know what it is, but it's very, very good.
I know I'm having the same problem. I was coming in at a 5, but I think it's actually a 5.5. Yeah. But I know there's other 5.5s that made me scream more because I guess they were more emotional. And this one's not, like you said, Maya. But it's just good. Like it's just good. Like well thought out. It's intellectual. It stays with you. I think it's a 5.5. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Across the board.
Yee-hee.
Yeah, man. How often does that happen?
Not very.
Not very, but it's been happening more and more. It happened, I think, twice now with.
Do you think we're creating a hive mind?
Yeah, we are.
So, anyways, what are we reading next week?
Okay, so next week we're going to be joined by Colette Sartor, and we're going to read a story of her choosing. Listeners may be familiar with Colette because we've discussed 2 of her stories. Let me do that again. Listeners may be familiar with Colette because we've discussed 2 of her short stories on the show. We discussed La Cuesta Encantada on episode 67 and Once Removed on episode 115. Colette suggested that we read The Proxy Marriage by Maile Malloy. It's in the New Yorker, and a link is available in the show notes. But before you go, rush en masse to literaryroadhouse.com and leave your footprints and opinions all over the comment section to this story. Know of any bizarre things that washed up on a beach somewhere? Tweet them to us at Lit Roadhouse. If a giant is a huge version of a human, then is a novel a huge version of a short story? Come marvel at the giant stories on Literary Roadhouse Book Club, a monthly show that discusses full fiction novels. In July, we're reading Reservoir 13 by John McGregor. Also, we need a glass to display our mummified pizzle. Support our podcast at patreon.com/Literary Roadhouse. Every bit helps. And as always, share this podcast with a demented teen in your nostrils. Until next time. Read a good story.
Every week, I think you can't get better, but you continue to.
You know, better. And that outro could actually start like a huge riot between short story authors and novelists arguing with each other. Like that was a very controversial question you asked there, Eddie.
Beautifully worked in there.
And after having read, a certain Saunders book, I would vote no.